That monstrosity is in violation of Article 7, Section B, Paragraph 4 of the Covenant's Conditions and Restrictions. You have 24 hours to remove it from the neighborhood, Sergeant, or I will have it towed and impounded at your expense. The way she spat my old rank, like it was something filthy she'd found on the bottom of her shoe, was the first sign this wasn't going to be a simple welcome to the neighborhood chat. I looked from her, a woman whose entire body seemed to be straining against the floral print fabric of her muumuu, to my truck, my deuce and a half, a 1968 Kaiser M35A2, lovingly and painstakingly restored over a decade of weekend passes and late nights in motor pools from Fort Bragg to Baghdad. It wasn't a monstrosity. It was history. It was my history. Its olive drab paint was immaculate. The chrome on the grille gleamed under the afternoon sun, and the massive tires were parked perfectly parallel to the curb, not an inch over my property line on the street. It was also the cornerstone of the veteran-owned hauling and logistics business I was starting, the very reason I'd been able to afford a down payment on this house in what I thought was a quiet, respectable suburban enclave. Her name was Karen, of course. She'd introduced herself as the HOA president with the kind of self-importance usually reserved for heads of state or people who have just discovered gluten-free bread. She held a clipboard like a scepter, her knuckles white, and a vein throbbed in her temple, a tiny purple worm signaling the storm behind her eyes. I'd been a homeowner for exactly 72 hours. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice as level and calm as I would during a range briefing, "I appreciate you coming over. I'm Jack. I just moved in. I've read the CC&R's Section 7B4 pertains to inoperable or unlicensed vehicles. My truck is fully operational, registered, and insured. It's not a commercial vehicle in the sense of having signage, and it's parked legally on a public street." She scoffed, a wet, dismissive sound. "It's an eyesore. It lowers property values. It's a military surplus junk pile, and it doesn't belong here. This is a family neighborhood, not a war zone." The irony was so thick I could have paved a road with it. I bought this house to finally give my family a life outside of war zones, and here was this woman, manufacturing a conflict on my own front lawn. "It's my personal vehicle," I stated again, my patience, a long-practiced military discipline, holding firm. "And I'm not moving it." Her face went from pink to a startling shade of crimson. "You will find, Sergeant, that I run this neighborhood. You are on probation as a new resident. You will comply or you will face the consequences. 24 hours?" She turned on her heel, a maneuver that caused a considerable ripple effect in her wake, and marched back toward her own perfectly manicured lawn, where a plastic flamingo stared at me with a singular judgmental eye. I watched her go, the clipboard held tight against her side, a weapon in waiting. I had faced down IEDs, navigated complex tribal negotiations in hostile territory, and managed the logistics for an entire battalion. I thought I'd left the petty tyrants and bureaucratic nightmares behind me. But looking at the back of Karen's head, I had a sinking feeling I had just moved into the command post of a whole new kind of insurgency. This is going to be a battle, isn't it? If you think I should stand my ground, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've got your own HOA nightmare story, I want to hear it. We're all in this together. Now let me tell you how this all started, because that truck, that so-called monstrosity, was more than just a vehicle. It was a promise. I'd bought it as a wreck, a rusted-out shell sitting in a farmer's field in rural North Carolina. I was 22, a freshly minted private first class, and I'd sunk my entire signing bonus into it. For the next 20 years, that truck was my anchor. When I was deployed, my dad and I would talk about it on grainy satellite calls. We'd trade emails with links to parts suppliers. It was the project waiting for me back home, the tangible thing that represented a future beyond the dust and the danger. My wife, Sarah, used to joke that it was my other great love. She understood, though. She saw the hours I poured into it not as time away from her, but as the therapy I wouldn't seek elsewhere. Every sanded panel, Every rebuilt gasket, every polished piece of chrome was a way of putting myself back together, too. When I finally retired as a master sergeant, the plan was simple. Settle down, start the business, and be the kind of dad and husband who was always there. We found this house in Oakwood Preserve. It had a big yard for our daughter Lily, a great school district, and a 2-car garage. The HOA rules seemed standard. Keep your lawn mowed, don't paint your house purple. Nothing in the 20-page document I'd meticulously reviewed mentioned anything about the aesthetic sensibilities of the HOA president. Nothing prohibited a historically significant, beautifully restored street-legal vehicle. My mistake was underestimating the human element. I underestimated the insatiable hunger for power that can fester in a person given a thimbleful of authority. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was creating a fiefdom, and my deuce and a half was the first castle on her border that refused to bow. The 24-hour deadline was a test, a shot across the bow to see if I was a sheep or a wolf, and I had spent far too long in the company of wolves to ever be mistaken for a sheep. The 24-hour deadline came and went with the quiet dignity of a sunrise. I didn't move the truck. In fact, I did the opposite. I went out that morning with a bucket of soapy water, a microfiber cloth, and a bottle of chrome polish. I spent a solid hour making the grill, the bumper, and the side mirrors so bright they could have guided aircraft. It was a deliberate act, a silent statement. I saw Karen watching me from her window, a curtain twitching like a nervous tick. Her beige sedan pulled out of her driveway shortly after, driving past my house with a noticeable, deliberate slowness. I gave her a cheerful wave. The smile I received in return was a thin, bloodless line. That was Tuesday. Wednesday was trash day. I rolled our 2 large bins to the curb the night before, one for household waste, one for recycling, same as every other house on the street. I'm a man of routine and discipline. Bins go out Tuesday night, bins come in Wednesday afternoon. It's a simple logistical operation. At 7:15 a.m., I heard the familiar hydraulic groan and the beep, beep, beep of the large waste management truck making its way down our street. I was in the kitchen, making Lily's lunch for school, the smell of coffee filling the air. I watched through the window as the truck's big mechanical arm reached out, grabbed my neighbor's bins, lifted them, and emptied them with a loud crash. Then it moved on. It rolled right past my house. The arm didn't extend. The driver didn't even slow down. He just skipped us. I stood there for a moment, coffee cup halfway to my lips, processing. Maybe it was a mistake? A new driver on the route? But the movement there was too fluid, too intentional. There was no hesitation. The truck proceeded to the next house, performed its duty, and continued on its way down the block, leaving my 2 full bins standing there like sentinels of my social rejection. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. By the end of the day, my bins were the only ones left on the entire street, monuments to my non-compliance. A faint, ripe odor was already beginning to emanate from the household waste bin under the hot afternoon sun. A few neighbors gave me sympathetic, nervous looks as they drove by. None of them stopped. By Thursday, the smell was undeniable. Sarah came home from work and wrinkled her nose. "What is that?" she asked, her eyes landing on the still full bins. "They missed us," I said, my voice tight. "I called the company. They said they'd open a ticket." But I knew a ticket wasn't going to solve this. This was a coordinated attack. On Friday morning, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Jack, it's Marco." Marco, my cousin, my mom's sister's kid. We'd grown up together, but life had taken us in different directions. He'd stayed local, taking over his father-in-law's small sanitation business and, through sheer grit and smarts, building it into a regional powerhouse, Ortega Waste and Recycling. They'd won the municipal contract for 3 counties a few years back. "Marco, man, how are you?" I asked, genuinely surprised and happy to hear from him. "I'm good, man, I'm good. Hey, listen, weird question," he said. his voice a little hesitant. "You having some kind of trouble over at your new place?" Some lady, a Karen, said she was the HOA president for Oakwood Preserve. "She called my main office yesterday, told my dispatch manager that service for your address was to be suspended immediately due to non-payment of a heavy vehicle surcharge. Said you were delinquent and the HOA was exercising its right to suspend services." The line went quiet for a second. The pieces clicked into place with the cold, hard certainty of a rifle bolt locking into battery, the twitching curtain, the slow drive-by. The skipped bins, it was all her. She hadn't just made a threat, she had actively interfered with a service contract I held. "She what?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "Yeah," Marco continued. "My manager, Brenda, she's a stickler for the rules. She told the lady we can't suspend an individual account based on a third-party call, especially not for some fee we've never heard of. Our contract is with the individual homeowner, paid through municipal taxes. The HOA has no standing." Brenda told her to pound sand, basically, but she logged the call. The thing is, the driver on that route is new. He's a good kid, but he's still learning. The notes get pushed to his tablet, and he must have seen service suspension request next to your address and just followed it without checking the override note from Brenda. Total screw-up on our end, and I am so sorry. "Man, I'm sending a guy out this afternoon to take care of your bins, but I had to call. What the hell is a heavy vehicle surcharge?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out the window at my beautiful, monstrous truck. The faint, sweet smell of rotting garbage hung in the air. This was no longer about an eyesore. This was about a petty tyrant who had just illegally and fraudulently misrepresented my account status to a commercial entity. She had declared war, and she had no idea who she had just picked a fight with. "Marco," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face, "there is no such thing. But I think you and I need to have a cup of coffee, and do me a favor. Can you get me a copy of that call log, maybe even a recording?" The initial shock of Karen's audacity quickly hardened into a cold, clear resolve. This wasn't just about my truck or my garbage anymore. It was about a fundamental principle I had spent 20 years of my life defending. You don't get to bully people and make up rules just because you have a fancy title and a clipboard. Power without accountability is tyranny, whether it's in a war-torn country or a suburban cul-de-sac. My first step, even before meeting Marco, was to begin my own counterintelligence operation. I retrieved the thick stack of papers I'd been given at closing, the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I spread them across the dining room table, the same way I used to lay out maps for a mission briefing. I went through the entire document, line by line, with a highlighter and a set of colored pens. I cross-referenced every clause Karen had mentioned, every potential violation she could possibly try to pin on me. As I suspected, a heavy vehicle surcharge appeared nowhere. There were no specific restrictions on vehicle weight or military history. The language was vague, referring only to commercial vehicles with signage, inoperable vehicles, and vehicles that posed a nuisance, a term so subjective it was legally laughable. This document was her Bible, and I was going to know it better than she did. That afternoon, a special truck from Ortega Waste and Recycling, a smaller, more maneuverable one, pulled up to my curb. The driver, a young guy with a polite smile, hopped out. "Mr. Miller? So sorry about the mix-up." He quickly and efficiently emptied the bins. The foul smell dissipated, but the stink of Karen's overreach remained. Later, I met Marco at a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. He slid a folder across the table. "Here you go," he said. "Brenda's full report on the call, including the time, the number it came from, and her detailed notes. And this," he tapped a small USB drive, "is the audio. All our incoming customer service calls are recorded for quality assurance. Turns out quality assurance is about to get a whole new meaning." I pocketed the drive like it was a critical piece of evidence, which it was. "I owe you, man," I said. "Don't mention it," Marco replied, stirring his coffee. "Family first. Besides, I can't stand bullies. This woman tried to interfere with my business operations and defraud my company by lying about your account. This isn't just an HOA squabble for me anymore either. This is tortious interference. My legal team would have a field day with this. His words solidified my strategy. This wouldn't be a shouting match over a fence. This would be a methodical, documented, and legal dismantling of her authority. The next morning, I took my first walk through the neighborhood with a new purpose. I wasn't just getting exercise, I was conducting reconnaissance. I paid attention to the houses. Who had pristine HOA-approved lawns, and who had small, subtle signs of rebellion? A wind chime that was slightly too large? A garden gnome peeking out from behind a bush? A basketball hoop that looked a little weathered? I made a mental map. My first stop was a house 2 blocks over. The lawn was immaculate, but tucked away near the side fence was a small, hand-painted sign that read Certified Pollinator Garden, surrounded by native wildflowers that were technically, according to a strict reading of the bylaws, weeds. A man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a dusting of soil on his trousers was tending to them. "Morning," I said, slowing my pace. "That's a beautiful garden." He looked up, his eyes immediately darting around as if expecting a sniper to emerge from the azaleas. "Thanks," he said quietly, hoping the queen bee doesn't notice. "The queen bee?" I asked, feigning ignorance. He gave a wry smile. "Karen, our illustrious president, fined me last month for unapproved landscaping. Said my coneflowers were unsightly." He introduced himself as Arthur, a retired accountant. We chatted for 20 minutes. I told him about my truck, and he told me about the endless, nitpicking fines. "She runs the board meetings like a dictator," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "The treasurer, he's her crony. They pass special assessments without proper votes. The financials are a black box." "An accountant, you say?" I mused. "I'm thinking of requesting the HOA's financial records for review. The bylaws say any homeowner can. I might need someone with a sharp eye to help me make sense of them." Arthur's eyes lit up with a fire I hadn't seen before. It was the spark of a man who had been pushed too far, a man who saw an opportunity to fight back with the tools he knew best: numbers and ledgers. "Son," he said, wiping his hands on his pants, "you just tell me when. I've been waiting for this audit for 5 years." I left Arthur's house with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my truck anymore. I was fighting for Arthur's coneflowers. I continued my walk and spotted a young couple, the Davidsons, struggling to repaint a swing set in their backyard, a very specific, very boring shade of beige. They looked exhausted. I introduced myself, and within minutes, their story tumbled out. They'd been fined because their daughter's original swing set was primary color red. It was deemed visually disruptive. They were a young family, barely affording their mortgage, and the constant threat of fines was terrifying. My last stop was the home of Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow whose house was next to Karen's. I'd seen Karen talk to her once, pointing and gesturing at a small decorative bird bath. As I approached, Mrs. Gable was nervously trying to move it. She was frail, and the concrete pedestal was heavy. "Here, let me help you with that," I offered. She flinched, startled. "Oh no, I can't." "Karen said it's not on the approved list." Her hands were trembling. I looked at this sweet old woman, terrified in her own yard over a piece of garden decor, and the cold resolve in my gut burned hotter. I had found my allies. The accountant, the young family, the frightened widow. We were a ragtag platoon, but we all had a common enemy. The insurgency had its first members. The first official salvo in my paper war was a formal, typed letter sent via certified mail with return receipt requested. It was addressed to the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association Board of Directors, care of Karen, President. The tone was professional, sterile, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the kind of memo I used to write when a supply depot was shorting us on essential equipment. In it, I politely referenced Section 4.2 of the bylaws, which granted every homeowner the right to inspect the association's books and records with reasonable notice. I requested digital and physical copies of the last 5 years of financial statements, including detailed income and expense reports, all board meeting minutes, and a current roster of all board members with their contact information. I gave them 10 business days to comply, as stipulated in the state's property code. I knew this letter would be like a grenade rolled into her pristine office. It was a direct challenge not to her personal authority, but to the operational integrity of her entire regime. While I waited for the inevitable fallout, the formal violation notices regarding my truck began to arrive. The first one was a simple warning slipped under my windshield wiper. It cited the same Article 7, Section B, Paragraph 4 she had quoted at me. I photographed it, dated it, and filed it away. My response was another certified letter. I quoted the bylaw back to them, carefully explaining, as if to a child, how my vehicle did not meet the criteria for being inoperable, unlicensed, or a nuisance under the defined terms. I attached copies of my current registration and insurance policy. I ended the letter by stating that any further unsubstantiated claims would be considered harassment. A few days later, a second notice arrived, this time in the mail. The fine was $50. The violation was now listed as unapproved commercial-grade vehicle. They were changing their tactics, trying to find a charge that would stick. I photographed it, filed it, and prepared my next response. This time I included the definition of a commercial vehicle from the state's own Department of Transportation, highlighting that my M35A2, registered for personal use and lacking any commercial signage, did not qualify. I also included a polite but firm question. Could you please provide the minutes from the board meeting where the definition of commercial grade was discussed and approved as an amendment to the CC and RS? I knew, of course, that no such meeting had ever taken place. I was building a case, brick by brick, creating a paper trail that demonstrated their arbitrary and capricious enforcement. Each letter I sent was a trap, daring them to step in it. Meanwhile, Arthur the accountant was chomping at the bit. Any word on the financials? He'd ask every time I saw him. Patience, Arthur, I'd say with a smile. Good intelligence takes time. The 10-day deadline for the records request was set to expire on a Friday. At 4:55 p.m. that day, an email landed in my inbox. It was from Karen. The body of the email was curt. The requested records are available for inspection at the management company's office during business hours. Please schedule an appointment. She had attached a single, blurry, almost unreadable PDF of the current year's budget summary. It was a pathetic attempt at compliance, designed to be obstructive. She was betting I wouldn't go through the hassle. She was wrong. I replied immediately. Thank you for your prompt response. Per my original request for digital and physical copies, please let me know when I can expect them to be delivered or mailed to my address, as is my right under state law. Alternatively, I am available to pick up the physical copies at your convenience. I will bring a portable scanner to create my own digital set during the inspection, which I am scheduling for this coming Monday at 9 a.m. I will be accompanied by my financial advisor. I CC'd Arthur on the email, anointing him with his new official title. His reply came back in minutes. Confirmed. I will be there. The thought of me showing up with a professional accountant and a scanner must have sent Karen into a panic. A new email arrived an hour later, this one with a massive zip file attached. Please find the requested documents attached, it read. The tone now noticeably colder. No, thank you. No, sincerely. Just the data. I downloaded the file and immediately forwarded it to Arthur. His response was almost giddy. It's Christmas in July. Don't call me. Don't text me. I'm going in. For the next 2 days, Arthur was a ghost. Then, on Sunday night, he called me. His voice was grim. Jack, it's worse than I thought, he said. The bookkeeping is a disaster. It's either gross incompetence or intentional obfuscation. There are thousands of dollars in miscellaneous administrative fees and landscaping consultations with no corresponding invoices. The reserve fund hasn't been properly audited in 3 years. And the fines, my God, the fines. The income from fines is nearly 20% of the operating budget. An HOA's budget shouldn't be balanced on the backs of its residents. It's predatory. He then directed me to the meeting minutes. They were a joke. Vague summaries, no detailed vote counts. Motions were passed without any record of who was present or how they voted. Special assessments for projects like front entrance beautification were approved, but the corresponding expenses in the financial records were paid to a company called Creative Curb Appeal, LLC. Arthur had done a quick business search. The registered agent for Creative Curb Appeal, LLC. Karen's maiden name. The address on file? A P.O. box she'd had for years. She wasn't just a bully, she was a grifter, using the HOA as her personal piggy bank. The third violation notice arrived on Monday. This one was for $100, and the charge was simply continued non-compliance. It came with a new threat, a formal hearing before the HOA board was being scheduled. They intended to vote on levying the maximum fine and authorizing the forced removal of my truck. This was it. The escalation I had been waiting for. She was done with the paperwork skirmish and was calling for a decisive battle. And I was ready. I had the financials, I had the bylaws, and in my desk drawer I had a USB drive with a crystal clear recording of the HOA president committing fraud. The official notification for the board hearing arrived in a crisp white envelope, delivered by certified mail. It felt weighty, important. Karen was clearly trying to intimidate me with formality. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks out, to be held in the clubhouse of the Oakwood Preserve Community Center. The agenda was stark. Hearing and vote on continued covenant violations by homeowner at 121 Oak Street. My address, my public shaming. I read the letter, and instead of feeling intimidated, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment. She was bringing the fight to a public forum, convinced her power was absolute. She was arranging her own firing squad and handing me the rifle. My first call was to my old JAG buddy Liam Connolly. We had served together in the 101st Airborne. He was a pit bull in the courtroom, a guy who could dissect a legal argument with surgical precision. Now a partner at a civilian law firm in the city, he owed me a favor after I'd managed to find and ship a rare transmission for his vintage Mustang to a forward operating base in Afghanistan. "Jack, my man," he said, his voice booming over the phone. "Don't tell me you're in trouble already." I laughed. "Depends on your definition of trouble, Liam. I'm having a disagreement with my HOA president." I spent the next 30 minutes laying out the entire situation. The truck, the invented surcharge, the garbage incident, Marco's recording, the financial documents from Arthur, the pattern of harassment, and the upcoming hearing. I could almost hear the gears turning in his legal mind. "Jack," he said after a long pause, his tone shifting from friendly to professional. "This is beautiful. This is a work of art. She's not just a bully, she's a walking, talking lawsuit." He explained the legal terms for what I already knew in my gut. Tortious interference with a contract, potential wire fraud for using a phone to misrepresent my account status, breach of fiduciary duty as the HOA president. The list went on. "The hearing is perfect," Liam said, his excitement palpable. "It's her stage. We let her build the whole set, put on her costume, and deliver her monologue. Then we pull the curtain back and show the audience who she really is." His plan was simple and elegant. We would not object to the hearing. We would not send angry letters. We would attend and we would come prepared. Liam agreed to be there pro bono. "Consider the Mustang transmission debt paid in full," he said. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." My next step was to prepare our star witness. I met Marco for lunch. I played him Liam's assessment of the situation. Marco's eyes widened when he heard the term wire fraud. "So this is serious, Mia serious," he said. "Deadly serious," I confirmed. "And your testimony is the linchpin. The recording is the smoking gun, but having you there, the owner of the company she tried to manipulate, telling the story in person, that's what will turn the tide with the neighbors." Marco, who loved a good fight as much as I did, grinned. "I'll be there. I'll even wear my company polo shirt. Make it official." With the legal and star witness components locked in, I turned my attention back to the ground game, the community. I printed out a simple, anonymous flyer. It didn't mention my name or my truck. It just said, HOA board hearing Thursday, October 5th, 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. Agenda: discussion of covenant enforcement and resident fines. All homeowners are encouraged to attend and make their voices heard. I gave a stack to the Davidsons, the young couple with the swing set. They were nervous, but they were also angry. They slipped one into every neighbor's mailbox in the dead of night, a covert operation that gave them a small thrill of rebellion. Arthur, meanwhile, had been busy transforming his financial analysis into something a layman could understand. He created simple charts and graphs that showed the absurdly high income from fines, the questionable payments to Karen's shell company, and the stagnant reserve fund. It was a masterpiece of data visualization, telling a clear story of mismanagement and greed. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected place. Mrs. Gable, the elderly widow, knocked on my door one evening. She was holding a worn accordion-style folder, the kind people use for coupons. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were resolute. "I heard about the meeting," she whispered, glancing nervously toward Karen's house. "I want you to have this." She handed me the folder. Inside was every single violation notice and fine she had received from Karen over the past 6 years. They were meticulously organized by date. There was a fine for her bird bath, a fine for her mailbox flag being excessively faded, a fine for a small crack in her driveway, a fine for her rose bushes growing 2 inches over the sidewalk. It was a documented history of petty cruelty, totaling over $2,000 in nickel-and-dime penalties levied against a woman on a fixed income. "Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice thick with emotion. This is incredibly brave of you." "She told me if I didn't pay, she'd put a lien on my house," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I've lived here for 40 years. My husband and I built this house. I was so scared." I looked at the pathetic, cruel notices, and then at this courageous woman. The trap was now fully set. We had the legal framework, the star witness, the financial evidence, and now the emotional heart of our case. Karen thought she was staging a hearing to get rid of a truck. She had no idea she was the star of her own impeachment trial. The 2 weeks leading up to the hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare, executed with military precision. On the surface, I was calm, compliant. I continued to mow my lawn, wave at neighbors, and polish the chrome on my deuce and a half, which remained defiantly parked on the street. It became a local landmark, a symbol. I saw people slowing down as they drove by, some pointing, some smiling. It was no longer just my truck, it was the neighborhood's truck. Beneath the surface, our small rebellion was buzzing with activity. We formed a private group chat, initiated by the tech-savvy Mr. Davidson, called Oakwood Restoration Project. It became our digital command center. Arthur would post updates on his analysis, I would share legal insights from Liam, and the Davidsons would relay neighborhood chatter. More and more people asked to join the group as word of the hearing and the underlying discontent spread. People who had been silent for years started sharing their own stories of Karen's petty tyranny. A warning for leaving a child's bicycle on the driveway for an hour, a fine for having holiday decorations up 2 days after the approved removal date, a threat over the color of a welcome mat. The sheer volume of grievances was staggering. It was a textbook case of death by 1,000 cuts, and the community was finally starting to bleed out in the open. Liam, my JAG buddy, coached me on procedure. "The key is to let her have her moment," he advised over the phone. "Don't interrupt, don't object. Let her dig the hole as deep as she possibly can. The deeper the hole, the harder the fall." He had me prepare a binder, a thick 3-ring binder. In my years in the Army, I learned that the person with the most organized binder often wins the war before the first shot is fired. This was no different. We made a binder for every single board member, including Karen and her 2 cronies. Each binder was identical, meticulously organized with numbered tabs. Tab 1, a copy of the CC and RS, with relevant sections highlighted. Tab 2, copies of all the violation notices I had received alongside my certified mail responses. Tab 3, Arthur's financial analysis, complete with his damning charts and the business registration for Creative Curb Appeal, LLC. Tab 4, A full notarized transcript of the recorded phone call between Karen and Marco's dispatch manager, tab 5. A sworn affidavit from Marco detailing the incident. Tab 6. Anonymized. Sworn affidavits from 10 other residents, including the Davidsons and Arthur, detailing their own experiences with unjust fines and harassment. And finally, tab 7. Copies of all of Mrs. Gable's violation notices from the past 6 years, a heartbreaking testament to sustained abuse. The night before the hearing, my house was the unofficial headquarters. Arthur, Liam, Sarah, and I sat around the dining room table, the very table where I had first laid out the HOA bylaws. The binders were stacked in a neat pile. Liam walked me through the presentation one last time. "Start calm," he said. "Present the facts. Let the evidence speak for itself. When you play the audio, that's the turning point. That's when you'll see the room change." Sarah, who had been a quiet but firm supporter through all of this, placed her hand on my arm. "Just be you, Jack," she said. "You've been leading people your whole life. This is no different. They're just not wearing uniforms." Her faith in me was the best armor I could ask for. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went outside and stood by my truck. The moonlight glinted off the fresh coat of polish on the grill. This vehicle had been with me through so much. It was a symbol of resilience, of taking something broken and making it whole and strong again. In a way, that's what we were trying to do for our neighborhood. Karen had tried to turn my symbol of pride into a mark of shame, but she had failed. She had inadvertently turned it into a rallying flag. I placed my hand on the cool metal of the fender. The fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was for Arthur's garden, for the Davidsons' daughter's swing set, for Mrs. Gable's peace of mind, and for every other resident who had been made to feel small and powerless in their own home. Tomorrow, we weren't just going to a meeting. We were taking back our community. The trap was set, the evidence was compiled, and the alliance was strong. All that was left was for the Queen to walk onto the stage and step on the trigger. The clubhouse was packed. I had never seen it so full. Usually, HOA meetings were attended by Karen, her 2 board cronies, a sycophantic man named Gerald, and a perpetually sour-faced woman named Brenda, and maybe 2 or 3 other lost souls. Tonight, every single chair was filled and people were standing along the back and side walls. The Davidsons had done their job. The anonymous flyer had worked. The air was thick with a mixture of stale coffee, cheap perfume, and palpable tension. At the front of the room, Karen sat at a long folding table flanked by Gerald and Brenda. She beamed, mistaking the large crowd for a show of support for her. She saw it as an audience for her public execution of the non-compliant sergeant. She surveyed the room with a smug satisfaction, her gavel held loosely in her hand. My team and I took seats in the front row. Me, Sarah, Liam in a sharp suit that screamed expensive lawyer, Arthur clutching a copy of his financial report like it was a holy text, and Marco, looking impressively official in his dark blue Ortega waist and recycling polo. Mrs. Gable sat right behind us, a small, determined look on her face. Karen banged the gavel, a sound that was unnecessarily loud in the crowded room. "This special hearing of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice dripping with self-importance. "The sole item on tonight's agenda is the ongoing and flagrant covenant violations by the homeowner at 121 Oak Street." She looked directly at me. I met her gaze without expression. "For months," she began, launching into a pre-rehearsed tirade, "this board has worked tirelessly to resolve the issue of an unsightly, oversized military-style vehicle being parked on our streets. This vehicle, a clear violation of our community standards, lowers property values and presents an image inconsistent with the family-friendly character of Oakwood Preserve." She clicked a remote, and a projector screen behind her flickered to life. It showed a photo of my truck taken from an unflattering angle on a cloudy day, making it look dark and menacing. A few of Karen's known supporters murmured in agreement. "We have sent warnings. We have issued fines. We have offered every opportunity for compliance. These efforts have been met with defiance and disrespect. Her voice rose with theatrical indignation. This is not just about one truck. It's about order. It's about respecting the rules that protect all of our investments. If we let one person flout the rules, it opens the door for chaos. She paced in front of the table, a general rallying her troops. Therefore, the board is proposing a motion. First, to levy the maximum allowable fine of $1,000 for continued noncompliance. Second, to authorize the board to contract a heavy-duty towing service to have the vehicle forcibly removed and impounded at the owner's expense. I am now opening the floor for a vote on this motion. She paused for dramatic effect, looking around the room, expecting applause. Instead, she was met with a heavy, watchful silence. The crowd wasn't with her. They were waiting. This was the moment Liam had prepped me for. Before she could call the vote, Liam stood up. He was calm, his voice respectful but firm. "Madam President," he said, "before a vote is called that would deprive a homeowner of their property, Section 9.4 of the bylaws grants that homeowner the right to be heard. My client, Mr. Jack Miller, wishes to exercise that right." Karen's face tightened. She had not anticipated this. She clearly didn't know her own bylaws as well as we did. She glanced at her crony, Gerald, who just shrugged helplessly. To deny the request would be a procedural violation in front of the entire community. She was trapped. "Very well," she sneered, her voice tight with annoyance. "The homeowner may speak, but please be brief. The board's position is clear." I stood up and walked to the small lectern set up to the side of the table. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, my neighbors. I saw fear, anger, but most of all, I saw hope. They were counting on me. I took a deep breath. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady. "My name is Jack Miller. Karen is right about one thing. This isn't just about a truck." I let that hang in the air for a moment. It's about rules. It's about fairness. And it's about the truth. The show was about to begin. I placed my hand on the stack of binders my wife, Sarah, had just set on the lectern. "Before we discuss my truck," I said, my voice resonating through the silent room, "I believe it's important that we're all working from the same set of facts. I've taken the liberty of preparing some information for the board and for any homeowner who wishes to review it afterward." I picked up the top 3 binders and walked over to the head table. I placed one directly in front of Karen, one in front of Gerald, and one in front of Brenda. The thud of the heavy binders landing on the table was deeply satisfying. "Please open it," I invited. Karen shot me a look of pure venom, but under the gaze of 50 neighbors, she had no choice. She reluctantly opened the cover. Her cronies followed suit. "If you'll turn to tab 1, I continued, returning to the lectern, "you'll find a fresh copy of our CC and Rs. And if you then turn to tab 2, you'll see the violation notices I've received, alongside my formal responses, which cite the very bylaws in tab 1, proving that my fully operational, legally registered personal vehicle does not fall under the purview of the cited articles. This is a matter of simple fact, not opinion." I could see Karen's face turning a familiar shade of blotchy red as she flipped through the pages, realizing I had meticulously documented her flimsy, shifting accusations. "But," I said, raising my voice slightly, "this evening's issue goes far beyond a disagreement over bylaws. It's about an abuse of power. Madam President, you recently accused me of being delinquent on a heavy vehicle surcharge and used that false claim to try and suspend a service I pay for. Is that correct?" She was cornered. To admit it was to confess to a lie. To deny it was to call me a liar in a room where I was holding all the cards. "That is a private matter concerning fee collection," she stammered, trying to deflect. "Is it?" I asked. I turned to Marco. "Marco, would you please stand up?" Marco stood, his 6 feet, 2 inches frame and official company polo shirt commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Marco Ortega. He's the owner of Ortega Waste and Recycling, the company that provides our trash service." A murmur went through the crowd. This was an unexpected twist. "Marco," I said, "did our HOA president Karen contact your company regarding my account?" Yes, she did, Marco said, his voice clear and strong. She called my dispatch manager, identified herself as the HOA president, and instructed us to suspend service to 121 Oak Street, falsely claiming the homeowner was delinquent on a fee. Now, if you'll all turn to tab 4 in the binders, I announced to the board, you will find a notarized transcript of that phone call. But I think it's better if we all hear it directly. I pulled the small USB drive from my pocket and plugged it into a speaker I had brought. This call was recorded for quality assurance. I pressed play. Karen's shrill, arrogant voice filled the room. Yes, I am the HOA president for Oakwood Preserve. I need you to suspend service to 121 Oak Street immediately. The homeowner is delinquent on his heavy vehicle surcharge. The voice of Brenda, Marco's manager, was calm and professional. Ma'am, I don't show any such surcharge in our system. We can't suspend an account based on a third-party claim. Karen's voice came back, laced with frustration. Are you refusing to cooperate with the Homeowners Association? I assure you, you will regret it. I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a single, sharp gasp from someone in the back. Every eye was on Karen. Her face had gone from red to a pale, clammy white. She looked like she had been physically struck. That, I said quietly, is the sound of our HOA president committing fraud and attempting to illegally interfere with a private contract. Liam chose that moment to stand up. For the record, he announced, that act constitutes tortious interference and, depending on prosecutorial discretion, could also be viewed as wire fraud. The word fraud hung in the air like poison gas. The board members, Gerald and Brenda, stared at their binders, then at Karen, a look of dawning horror on their faces. And it gets worse, murmured, I said, turning the page. This isn't just about me. It's about a pattern of financial mismanagement and predatory fining. Arthur? I called. Arthur, the retired accountant, stood up. He was no longer the timid man I'd met in his garden. He stood tall, holding his report. He walked to the lectern and, in a calm, authoritative voice, walked the entire room through the financial discrepancies. He explained the black hole of administrative fees. He pointed out the unaudited reserve fund, and then he dropped the bomb. And finally, Arthur said, his voice ringing with conviction, we have payments totaling over $14,000 in the last 2 years made to a company called Creative Curb Appeal, LLC, for landscaping services. A search of state business records reveals this company is registered to a Karen P. Jensen. He paused, letting the name sink in. Karen's maiden name. The room erupted. Shouts of thief and resign echoed through the clubhouse. Karen was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I held up a hand for silence. There's one more thing, I said, my voice dropping. This isn't just about money. It's about cruelty. I looked to the back of the room. Mrs. Gable? The elderly woman stood up, trembling but resolute. I walked to her and gently took the folder of her fines. I walked back to the front and held it up. This is 6 years of harassment, 6 years of fines for bird baths, for faded flags, for rose bushes. Over $2,000 extorted from a widow on a fixed income under the threat of a lien on her home. I opened the folder and let the papers cascade to the floor at Karen's feet. This is not leadership, I said, my voice filled with cold fury. This is a disgrace. I turned my back on her and faced my neighbors. The motion on the floor is to fine me and tow my truck. I'd like to propose a new motion, a motion of no confidence in Karen as president of this association, and a call for her immediate removal from the board. The room exploded in a roar of approval. The chaos in the clubhouse was immediate and overwhelming. My motion for a vote of no confidence acted like a spark in a powder keg. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing at Karen, who sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. She was a dictator whose subjects had just stormed the palace. Gerald and Brenda, her once loyal cronies, were frantically trying to distance themselves from her, physically scooting their chairs away as if her corruption were contagious. It was Arthur who brought order back to the room. He stepped to the lectern, his voice cutting through the noise with the authority of a man who deals in hard facts. According to the bylaws, he announced loudly, a motion for the removal of a board member can be made from the floor if a quorum of homeowners is present. We have more than a quorum here tonight. The motion has been made. It must be voted on. Liam, ever the strategist, stepped forward. I suggest a simple show of hands to make the will of the community clear, he said, looking directly at the terrified faces of Gerald and Brenda. All in favor of the motion to remove Karen from the board of directors, please raise your hand. A forest of hands shot up. Mine, Sarah's, the Davidsons, Marco's, Mrs. Gable's. Nearly every single person in the room a sea of righteous anger. The message was undeniable. All opposed? Liam asked, turning his gaze to the head table. Karen, in a final pathetic act of defiance, slowly raised her hand. No one else did, not even Gerald and Brenda. They kept their hands firmly on the table, staring down at their binders as if their lives depended on it. The motion carries, Liam declared, with a grim finality. Karen, you are hereby removed from your position as president and as a member of the board of directors, effective immediately. For a moment, Karen just sat there, stunned. Then, the reality of her public humiliation crashed down on her. She shoved her chair back, the legs scraping horribly against the floor, and stood up. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I built this community. I protected your property values. You're all ungrateful." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is all your fault. You and your disgusting truck." She started stuffing papers haphazardly into her bag, her movements jerky and erratic. As she turned to storm out of the room, the main doors of the clubhouse swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. The room fell silent again, the anger replaced by a stunned curiosity. One of the officers, a tall, calm man with sergeant stripes on his sleeve, scanned the room. His eyes met mine, and I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He had arrived right on schedule. "We received a call about a disturbance, the officer said, his voice calm and professional. Then he looked toward the front table. "We also have a complaint we need to discuss. We're looking for a Ms. Karen Jensen." Karen froze halfway to the door. She turned around slowly, her face ashen. I am Karen Jensen," she stammered. "What is this about?" The officer walked toward her, his partner standing by the door. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions regarding a formal complaint filed this afternoon. The complaint alleges fraudulent activity and tortious interference with a business contract. It was filed by Mr. Jack Miller and Mr. Marco Ortega of Ortega Waste and Recycling." He gestured politely toward the door. "If you could please come with us, we can discuss this outside." The entire room watched, silent and captivated, as the woman who had terrorized them for years was being politely, but firmly, escorted out of her own throne room by the police. She didn't look at anyone. Her reign was over, ending not with a bang, but with a quiet walk of shame. As the doors closed behind her, a spontaneous cheer erupted in the room. It started as a smattering of applause and grew into a roar. People were hugging each other. The Davidsons were laughing, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Arthur gave me a firm, solid handshake, his eyes twinkling. Mrs. Gable came up and gave me a gentle hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." The war was over. We had won. With Karen gone, the community moved quickly to heal. An emergency election was held. Arthur, the hero of the hour, was unanimously elected as the new HOA treasurer. A level-headed lawyer who lived 3 streets over was voted in as president, and Mrs. Davidson, representing the younger families, took a seat on the board as well. The old guard was gone, replaced by a board that actually represented the community. Their first official act was to declare a full amnesty on all outstanding fines levied under Karen's regime. Their second act was to pass a motion formally declaring my deuce and a half a vehicle of historical significance and a valued community landmark. The final scene of this suburban drama played out 2 weeks later. We held a neighborhood-wide barbecue in the park next to the clubhouse. The grill was fired up, kids were running through sprinklers, and the air was filled with laughter instead of tension. I parked my truck, my beautiful, monstrous, victorious truck, right at the edge of the park. And there, sitting proudly on the massive front bumper, was a small, ceramic garden gnome with a fishing rod, on loan from Arthur. Next to it, Mrs. Gable had placed her bird bath, now filled with fresh water. It was no longer just my truck. It was a trophy, a monument to a community that had found its voice and taken back its freedom from a petty tyrant. As I flipped burgers, I looked at Sarah and Lily playing with the Davidson kids, at Arthur explaining the new, transparent budget to a group of engaged homeowners, and at Marco, who had brought his whole family, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since I'd bought the house. I had fought for my home, and in the process I had found a community. The price of freedom, it turns out, is eternal vigilance, even in the suburbs.